Gong and the merchants, struggling up the rugged path to Mount Hua, mutter complaints as they approach the summit. Ginsun grumbles that he never wants to see Mount Hua again, let alone set foot on this cursed mountain. The other merchants speculate about why the leader summoned them. Many are convinced it's simply to beg for more time. After all, raising 100,000 coins by the deadline would be impossible. Some sneer at the idea of the leader calling everyone there while drowning in debt, but others, despite the sect's decline, acknowledge that the name of the great Mount Hua still commands a certain respect. As they finally reach the gates, each of them can't help but feel a strange unease. The responsibility of severing Mount Hua's legacy, a sect that had protected Huan Prefecture for centuries, weighs heavily on them. Still, they press forward, mentally preparing to demand what they're owed. Inside the sect, they're greeted by Unam, who leads them to the main hall, where the leader stands ready to meet them. Gong greets him with a respectful bow, his words dripping with politeness. "It's good to see the leader once again," he says, though his tone is insincere. The leader thanks them all for making the difficult journey, offering them tea to ease their fatigue from the climb. Gong interrupts, however, saying they're just simple merchants and would prefer to handle business first. The leader apologizes for not considering their valuable time and explains the purpose of the gathering. "We called you here to provide an update on Mount Hua's situation," he begins. "Despite sending countless requests for assistance to our allies, none have come forward to help us. It pains me to admit it, but we will not be able to repay the full debt within the time frame." Gong stands, feigning sympathy but cutting straight to his point. "Leader, we've already given Mount Hua plenty of time. We, too, have families to support and cannot extend this debt forever." The leader nods, acknowledging their concerns. "I understand completely. That is why I wanted to speak to each of you personally. While we cannot pay the full amount now, we are prepared to offer a partial payment. What I ask is who among you would be willing to extend their portion of the debt, allowing us more time to repay?" He then bows humbly, asking for mercy on behalf of Mount Hua. The merchants murmur among themselves, caught off guard by this unexpected request. From a distance, Chang Mayang watches with interest, analyzing the leader's tactic. He's curious if this is a clever ploy to back the merchants into a corner, or the final act of a leader clinging to hope. Either way, he knows there's more to this situation. Gong, maintaining a thin smile, insists again that he has no choice but to refuse the extension. "Leader, I already told you we cannot extend the deadline further," he says firmly. But the leader shakes his head calmly. "You misunderstand," he replies, still addressing the entire group. "I'm not speaking solely to you, Gong. Mount Hua owes more than 100,000 coins in total. Yes, but each merchant here holds a specific portion of that debt. So, I am asking individually, who among you is willing to extend their own portion for repayment in the future?" Gong's smile fades. He silently curses the leader, realizing that this desperate man is far more shrewd than he appears. The merchants stand in tense silence as Gong, with a smirk, challenges them to make their choice. He points to a spot for anyone willing to extend the deadline. On the other side, declaring that those who want their money immediately should join him. He warns that whoever chooses leniency will be cast out from the merchants' union and no longer recognized in the trade community. The merchants murmur among themselves, weighing their options. For a moment, no one moves, and Gong's laughter echoes through the hall. Turning to the leader, he sneers, "See that? No one has pity for your place." But then, unexpectedly, someone steps forward, breaking the silence. It's Jongin, slowly crossing to the side of those willing to extend the deadline. The other merchants stare in shock, and Gong's mocking smile vanishes. "Jongin, what are you doing?" he demands, confused and furious. Jongin looks at the gathered merchants, shaking his head. "Stop staring at me like that," he mutters, a bit embarrassed. "I know I'm making a foolish choice." Turning to Gong, he explains, "You wouldn't understand because you're not from Huan Prefecture. You came here just to take over businesses," still bewildered. "What are you talking about?" he snaps, dismissing Jongin's words. Jongin, ignoring him, continues, "Everyone who grows up in Huan hears the legends of Mount Hua, the tales of sword masters and noble warriors. We all dream of joining the sect, even if most of us give up when we realize we lack the talent. Mount Hua has always protected Shanxi Province and Huan Prefecture. My father, my grandfather, they both taught me that Mount Hua is our pride. Gong rolls his eyes, unable to believe what he's hearing. So you're willing to throw away your future profits because of some old stories? Think about this carefully, Jongin. This isn't a decision you can take back. You'll regret it. Jongin sighs, recalling his thoughts on the climb up. You know, on my way up here, all I could think about was how close I was to retiring rich, he admits, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. But now, here I am, ready to give that up. Yes, it's a big mistake, maybe the biggest I'll ever make. Jongin, resolute, explains that he's earned enough to live comfortably, and even if he never receives another coin from Mount Hua, he'll consider it a small regret. But if he were to stand by and watch Mount Hua collapse today because he didn't step forward, that regret would haunt him for life. I couldn't live with that, he says firmly, no matter how much money I made. Mong Gong scoffs. Fine, do what you want, Jongin, he sneers, since you're the only one foolish enough to refuse payment. But suddenly, a voice from the crowd interjects. Who said it's just one person? Slowly, other merchants begin to walk over, joining Jongin's side. Gong's eyes widen as he realizes that many more merchants are willing to stand by Mount Hua than he expected. The leader, bowing his head, he says, "It's heartening to see that so many of you still feel a meaningful connection to this place." He then nods to Unam, who steps forward, placing a large box on the ground and opening it. From across the room, Mong Gong sees the glint of official seals and records. These, the leader says, are the property records of Huan Prefecture. Mount Hua has always shown generosity to your ancestors, protected your families, and helped this prefecture thrive for countless generations. Yet some here have chosen betrayal over loyalty. He points to the records, declaring, according to these records, Mount Hua rightfully owns all these businesses, and we are now assuming control over them and every last coin they have accumulated. Trying to keep his composure, Gong lets out a strained laugh, dismissing it all as an elaborate joke. Surely, this is going too far, he says mockingly. The leader's gaze hardens. Shame on you, Mangong, if you think I'm here to jest. Gong slams the box shut, his face a mask of anger. Prove it, he demands. How do we know these records are authentic? We have no assurance we're not being deceived. Hyanjong pauses, giving a slight nod. You're right, Gong. It's fair to question authenticity. At this, Hyanjong steps forward, acknowledging the importance of validating the records. Gong's merchants begin to cheer, thinking they've won a point. But, with a cool smile, Hanyang continues, which is why, anticipating this very situation, half of these records were sent to the prefecture for verification 2 days ago. A look of horror dawns on Gong's face as he realizes the implications. While they were busy climbing the mountain, Mount Hua's records were already being reviewed and validated in Hua'an. 2 days' time is more than enough to process the transfers and finalize Mount Hua's claim over the properties. These records on the mountain are merely a backup. The primary documents have likely already sealed Mount Hua's ownership legally. Gong's face twists with rage and he explodes, shouting accusations at the leader. But Hyanjong raises a hand, silencing him. Mong Gong, lower your voice. You have no right to shout here. True friendship is helping others in their time of need. But you and those like you turned your backs when we needed you most. There's no mercy for traitors. Go back to Huan Prefecture. It's already resolved. He gestures dismissively to the merchants who betrayed the sect, adding, were it done as strictly as the records state, we could have taken everything. But because of the work you've put into those businesses, we'll allow you to leave with 1 cart of belongings each. That's all. Gong gritting his teeth in frustration. I won't forget this, he hisses, turning on his heel to leave, as the other merchants, silent and defeated, watch him go. With Gong and his followers gone, Hyanjong turns to the merchants who chose to stay loyal. For those of you who stood by Mount Hua until the very end, nothing changes. You may continue managing the businesses as before, and you'll keep the profits. The only difference is that the ownership now belongs to Mount Hua. Jongin, now technically an employee of Mount Hua, feels ambivalent despite being in a better position than Gong. Once the proud owner of a shop, he's now wondering why his grandfather placed such deep trust in the sect. The scene then shifts to Chang Mayang, who, back at Mount Hua, fumes with anger. He's incredulous at the leader's decision to let the merchants take even a single cart of wealth. Determined to stop This perceived betrayal of Manhwa, Chang Mayang rushes off to intercept the merchants. Meanwhile, outside the city gates, Gong and the other merchants grumble as they guide their loaded carts, glowering at the government soldiers who have been stationed to ensure order. The merchants are furious, knowing that if the sect leader hadn't intervened, they would have lost everything. They turn on Gong, demanding answers for his role in their downfall. Gong, visibly irritated, turns back and argues that it's not only his fault. However, he soon rallies his spirits, brushing off the merchant's complaints. This is temporary, he scoffs. Those records? Forgeries by that cowardly leader and his so-called prefecture officials. Some merchants murmur doubts, recalling how legitimate the records appeared, but Gong remains defiant. He insists that the prefecture officials must have been bribed, and he hatches a plan to take the matter to the higher authorities in Luang, vowing to expose the entire conspiracy. However, as he speaks, a voice cuts through the forest, taunting and familiar. Dressed like a bandit, Chang Mayang steps forward with a cough, casually informing Gong, "As far as I know, I'm the only one here." Gong squints, confused by the sight of this bandit with the stance of a seasoned fighter. Assuming the stranger is after the riches in their carts, Gong sneers, "If you know what's good for you, leave now. You'll lose your life for nothing." But Chang Mayang's eyes narrow. He has no intention of stealing anything. He's simply taking back what rightfully belongs to Manhwa. "So, you're with that damn sect," he sneers, signaling to his mercenaries to attack. "Perfect. I'll make an example of you." In a flash, Chang Mayang launches himself at the mercenaries. The first mercenary receives a hard smack on the head with Chang Mayang's scabbard. Another gets struck on the chin, and yet another on the forehead. In mere seconds, the mercenaries are scattered, sprawled across the ground like leaves in the wind. Chang Mayang stops just inches from Gong, his gaze cold. "You should know no one challenges my words and leaves with their limbs intact." Gong stares in shock, realizing Manhwa still possesses such martial talent. Regaining his composure, Gong taunts Chang Mayang, claiming that if he had been helping the sect earlier, they wouldn't be in their current pitiful state. "But you chose the wrong person to fight today," Gong sneers, "and I'll make sure your death serves as a warning to that pathetic sect." Gong activates his martial energy, which flares around him, revealing a level of power unusual for a simple merchant. He charges at Chang Mayang, his energy swirling with deadly intent. Chang Mayang notes this with suspicion. How does a shop owner possess such martial strength? But now isn't the time for questions. He decides to give Gong a proper beating, enough to leave him humbled, but able to speak afterward. The forest echoes with the impact of Gong's furious attack, but Chang Mayang sidesteps gracefully. As Gong lunges forward, Mayang deftly counters by slamming his scabbard onto Gong's hand, blocking the energy flow right at the release point. The backlash surges back through Gong's arm, and he screams in agony as his own energy recoils painfully. "You're way too slow," Mayang taunts. "You'll break every bone before you even land a hit." Enraged, Gong tries again, activating his power in his feet and lunging forward, but Mayang becomes a blur, dodging Gong's strike. Before Gong realizes what happened, Mayang is already behind him, blocking another desperate attack and sending another energy backlash up Gong's arm. Frustrated and humiliated, Gong, "This kid, he's not faster than me. He's not stronger either." Yet he can't land a single hit, and the truth is starting to sink in. Mayang's precision and awareness are far beyond his own skill. Each move he makes seems anticipated by Mayang, as though the boy reads his intentions before he even acts. With a sigh, Mayang finally declares, "Playtime is over." He casually asks Gong why a simple shop owner would possess such refined martial skills. Gong, feigning innocence, insists that martial artists can be shop owners too. But Mayang doesn't buy it. "With skills like that, you'd be making a fortune elsewhere," he replies, his tone flat and skeptical. "Don't try to convince me you're here on your own." Gong remains silent, maintaining his charade, but Mayang presses on, his tone darkening. "So, do you know what I do when I need answers?" he asks, slowly clenching his fist. "I beat them out of people." Mayang charges forward, feinting a blow at Gong's knee, but at the last second shifts to strike his shoulder. Confused, Gong tries to defend himself from an attack that isn't there, only to feel the hilt slam into his neck. Stumbling back, he watches in horror as Mayang's figure blurs, each hit appearing from unexpected angles. As Gong stumbles, struggling to focus, he starts to see the truth. This young man is no ordinary fighter. His calm, ruthless gaze betrays a lifetime of deadly skill. Mayang draws his sword. Sensing his life slipping away, Gong blurts out, "I don't want to die," slowly advancing as Gong's terror grows. Just as he's about to strike, a sudden burst of blue energy flares through the forest. Gong, barely conscious, his body faintly glowing. Mayang, observing, asks in shock, how does he know the god's palm technique? Pausing, Chang Mayang crouches down, intrigued. Wait, you're from the Southern Edge Sect, aren't you? Pieces of the puzzle falling into place. It makes sense now. You put Manhwa in debt and used their own techniques against them. So, who sent you from the Southern Edge? Gong, realizing his blunder, understands that he's revealed too much. As Mayang studies him, he comments that, in a twisted way, Gong's silence shows a certain loyalty. But he can't overlook the insult of the Southern Edge sect's interference, especially given their long-standing rivalry with Manhwa. For generations, Manhwa and the Southern Edge sect had competed fiercely, both wielding sword-based martial arts. While Southern Edge remains one of the top 10 sects, Manhwa's legacy has been tarnished, its strength dwindling. Yet Mayang finds it strange that such an elite sect would resort to using underhanded methods to undermine Manhwa. Either Gong doesn't know the full story, or he's being manipulated. Gong, struggling to speak, finally sneers. Why fight it? Manhwa's finished. The power and techniques that once made it great are lost. I'm just speeding up the inevitable. Mayang replies with a dark smile. Who said the techniques of Manhwa's past are gone? He raises his sword and presses it under Gong's chin, lifting him slightly off the ground. It's time I show you something, since you showed me your pitiful God's palm technique. With a flick of his wrist, Mayang's blade becomes a blur, the tip tracing arcs that create gusts of wind powerful enough to push Gong backward. Though the sword never touches him, Gong feels as though he's being battered, the force of the wind itself staggering him. Bewildered, he tries to block. As Mayang continues his assault, he finally whispers, "Cherry blossoms have the strongest scent when they bloom in winter." Chang Mayang stands over the fallen Gong, his sword sheathed, feeling the weight of his exhaustion as he coughs up a bit of blood. Though his skills remain sharp, he realizes that even what once felt like child's play is now taxing on his weakened body. Glancing around, he sees some of the merchants trembling nearby, and with a stern call, he beckons them over. The merchants, fearful of further beatings, tentatively approach. Chang Mayang casually asks, "Who here likes getting punched in the face?" The men, looking downcast, stay silent. Then he changes the question, "Who would prefer to leave without a black eye?" Instantly, every hand shoots up. Mayang smirks. The merchants, seeing a chance for mercy, turn and start running away, thanking him profusely. "Hey, get back here!" Mayang shouts, frustrated. They freeze, looking back nervously. "How am I supposed to take all these carts if you leave?" He demands to know the value of the goods they're hauling. The merchants mumble nervously, estimating the worth at between 1,800 and 8,000 coins per cart. Chang Mayang's eyes widen at the revelation of such wealth. "All right," he declares. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to Zenin to bring back that money, and you're buying back your own carts from me. And listen," he warns, "tell no one who it's for, or I'll make sure you regret it." One merchant, baffled, asks what happens if someone sent to Zenin doesn't return with the payment. Chang Mayang laughs, pointing out that without these carts, they have no future in business. If they don't come back with the money, they'll lose everything. "What happens if we report this to the government?" one asks meekly. Mayang simply kicks the ground, sending dust flying. "Go ahead, try it, but you'd better plan on fleeing to the far side of the continent." Realizing there's no escape from this lunatic, the merchants nod fearfully and hurry off to gather the money. Sometime later, Mayang returns to Mount Hua with the bills, his spirits high. He leaps energetically back into the sect, eager to report his success. Meanwhile, in the training grounds, Joe Gill wrings the sweat from his soaked shirt as he catches his breath. The disciples, though exhausted, feel a profound change in themselves. They finally look like real martial artists. Yanzhong, observing Joe Gill's satisfied grin, asks what he's so happy about. Joe Gill replies with pride, "Look at us. We finally look like a real martial arts sect." A few days ago, he could never have imagined himself training so intensely at Mount Hua. Yet now there's a sense of purpose in every disciple. They're no longer simply passing the time or climbing the mountain out of habit. Since Changmayang's arrival, everything has shifted. They don't yet fully realize the impact of these changes, but a new wind has begun to stir on Mount Hua, transforming it from within. And while it's just a breeze for now, they all sense that it could someday grow into a powerful force that would shape the future of Mount Hua. Joe Gill approaches the sect. He hears a flurry of voices and shouts. Workers are bustling around, carrying heavy stones and materials, with supervisors urging them to move faster and be careful not to break anything. Curious, third-year students gather around, trying to understand what's happening. Amidst the organized chaos, Anam stands at the center, directing the workers, ensuring everything runs smoothly. Yanzhong calls out to Anam, who approaches and explains with a grin, "These men are here to repair the entire temple." The boys look around in astonishment, noting the temple's worn-down state. Then the chief worker yells at the boys, "What are you all standing around for? There's a mountain of material to move and we need everyone helping. Now get going." Startled, but seeing there's no way out, they reluctantly get to work. Later that evening, they're shocked to see the kitchen brimming with delicious food, the likes of which they haven't seen in ages. For the first time, real meat and fresh vegetables are being prepared, and everyone is thrilled, barely able to believe their eyes. The changes that Chang Mayang had brought to the sect were happening faster than anyone anticipated. That night, Joe Gill and Yanzhong stroll outside, marveling at the transformations around them. New construction, an abundance of fresh food, and even new uniforms for the disciples. Everything feels surreal. Yanzhong stops, lost in thought, and Joe Gill asks what's on his mind. "Money," Yanzhong replies with a slight smile. Joe Gill laughs, agreeing that he hadn't expected the sect to use the funds so boldly. Yanzhong reflects on how their struggles were partly due to a lack of resources and how he's never seen their sect leader so relieved. Joe Gill then asks what they should do next, given all the changes around them. "Mount Hua is transforming," Yanzhong says thoughtfully. "But it's not just about money. I saw all those martial arts books in that chest." They remember Chang Mayang's wry smile when he'd claimed he had stumbled upon the chest of gold and techniques. Joe Gill chuckles, knowing Mayang's story was less than convincing, but he still wonders how he pulled it off. "One thing is certain," Yanzhong continues. "A storm of change is coming to Mount Hua, and if we aren't ready, it'll sweep us away." Joe Gill nods. "I just want to know where Chang Mayang disappeared to. He's been gone all day." His friend replies, "I heard he went to talk with the sect leader." The scene shifts to Chang Mayang's conversation with the sect leader, who praises him for finding the treasure. With a smile, the elder says Mayang deserves a reward and asks if there's anything he desires. Mayang, a bit caught off guard, isn't sure what to say. The elder even offers him a share of the wealth if he wishes. But Chang Mayang waves it off, explaining he's not particularly interested in wealth. Mount Hua, after all, has few luxuries worth spending on. The elder, a bit amused, comments that Mayang seems to have attained an enlightened detachment from material desires, assuming his young disciple has transcended such attachments. Inwardly, Chang Mayang chuckles, knowing he's already pocketed plenty from his dealings with the merchants. The elder then suggests advanced techniques as a reward, which Mayang also declines, stating there's likely a reason why each technique has a proper time to be learned. The elder nods, slightly embarrassed, yet impressed by his disciple's wisdom. Chang Mayang, ever the strategist, realizes that he still has many techniques to pass on, but he wants to do so subtly, without raising suspicion. Unsure of what else he truly desires from Mount Hua, he decides to request permission to visit Huan Prefecture whenever he pleases, hoping for a bit more freedom to roam and engage with the outside world. He explains to the leader that staying on the mountain restricts his growth as a martial artist and that exploring the world could help him improve. The leader considers this but expresses concern, saying it would violate the sect's regulations. Given all Mayang has achieved, it might be justified, but others might find it unfair. Seeing his main request denied, Chang Mayang tries a different angle. He remarks that his body is in rough shape, with his internal energy seemingly damaged. The leader listens intently, then asks what exactly he means. Chang Mayang clarifies that he's requesting some life-replenishing pills to restore his vitality. For a brief moment, the elders and disciples look hopeful, but the sect leader simply drinks his water, bangs his fist on the table, and says, "Fine, from now on, you're allowed to leave Manhwa." The instructors nod in agreement, but Chang Mayang, confused and disappointed, realizes he's getting the freedom but not the precious pills he wanted. The elders begin shooing him out, saying, "You're free to go, and don't expect us to be responsible for anything you get into out there." Chang Mayang is fuming as they close the door, thinking how he'd rather have had the pills than the permission. Inside, the sect leader, Haiyanzhong, turns to the instructors to discuss the boy. Unam comments that Chang Mayang is undoubtedly a prodigy. The leader then asks Han Sang for his opinion, though Sang is hesitant, admitting he's not the best judge of character. Yet, after a moment of reflection, Sang states that Chang Mayang feels like a child who doesn't act like one. Unam nods, realizing he's not alone in sensing this maturity. Hien Sang adds that he's met children who matured early due to difficult lives, but Mayang's maturity goes beyond that. He carries the air of someone with years of experience. When asked if there's anything wrong with the boy, Hien Sang says no, but remains watchful. The sect leader nods, thanking them. "He may have the qualities of a veteran martial artist, but he's still just a child," he says. "Let's treat him that way. Our mission here is to help every disciple reach their full potential and correct any flaws." Both instructors agree, acknowledging the leader's wisdom. Changing topics, the leader then asks Unam about the temple repairs. Unam explains that hauling materials up the mountain is difficult, so they're cutting trees locally. However, the process of cutting and drying the wood is slow. Haiyanzhong reassures him, stating that the resources are there to ensure Mount Hua's revival in both appearance and martial skill. Turning to Haiyan Sang, the leader instructs him to carefully study the newly found martial arts books to integrate them into training. Sang promises to proceed with caution, guaranteeing that no mistakes will be made with the techniques the disciples will learn. Zhang thanks both Sang and Unam, expressing his trust in them. However, Sang hesitates, unsure whether he should share his suspicions with the leader. He's noticed that the martial arts books seem a little too new for something claimed to be centuries old. Some even bear fresh ink stains, as if someone recently rewrote them. But while it feels strange, he decides not to mention it. The content seems genuine and helpful, and he concludes that someone must be trying to benefit Mount Hua while remaining anonymous. Meanwhile, outside, Chang Mayang is furious. After all his effort retranscribing those intense techniques, he's been tossed out just for requesting the life-replenishing pills. It's clear from the leader's reaction that they don't even remember how to produce the life pearls anymore. Now, Mayang is in trouble. Every fight leaves him grappling with side effects from opening the door, a forbidden technique he has used. His body's taking longer to recover than expected, and at this rate, he'll need a full year to heal completely. But a year is too long for a growing boy, especially one who needs to build his martial arts foundation now. He contemplates his options. To fully recover, he either needs a panacea, like the life pearl, or must receive energy directly from someone else. But it's unlikely anyone would perform a key transfer for him. Frustrated, he remembers how plentiful the pearls once were. He used to stumble upon them lying around the sect, even using them as cures for hangovers. Lost in thought, he gestures as if pouring a drink, reminiscing about his carefree days. Then it hits him. He remembers a remedy. Swiftly, he sprints through the forest. He arrives at the base of the tallest and most dangerous peak in Mount Hua. His target lies right in the heart of this treacherous terrain, a secluded cave he once used as a hiding spot from the sect leader, perfect for sneaking drinks without getting caught. He recalls how, despite his mischievousness, they never kicked him out of the sect, though that's not his concern now. He needs to reach the cave and retrieve the panacea. Realizing his weakened state, he returns with a sturdy rope, thinking he can descend from above rather than attempt a direct climb. He ties the rope to a tree and begins his descent, fully aware of the dangers. A single slip could be fatal. As he inches downward, his footing falters, and he begins to free fall, panicking that he's about to die. Thankfully, the rope tightens, stopping his fall just in time. Relieved, he steadies himself, but now he's swinging dangerously toward the mountain face. He channels his energy into one hand, slamming it against the rock to stop his momentum. The impact, however, fractures his arm. Despite the pain, he manages to activate an adhesion seal, making his hand stick to the rocky surface. With his arm throbbing, he spots the entrance to the hidden cave. If he releases the seal and uses his momentum, he can leap to the entrance. Carefully, he swings back and forth, timing his release, but just as he's ready to make his move, the rope snaps. Barely holding on, Chang Mayang activates the adhesion seal once more, gritting his teeth as the bones in his hands strain to their breaking point. His grip slips again and again, his body scraping against the rock, but with one final desperate pull, he manages to haul himself up into the cave. Exhausted and cursing, he mutters about how being the master of the blossoming blade feels like a cruel joke at this moment. The dust of ages covers everything, yet to his surprise, an old lamp still flickers dimly, casting a soft glow. He approaches a familiar chest and, with a pang of hope, opens it to reveal yet another chest inside. Heart pounding, he finally unlocks it, and a surge of energy fills the air like a field of blossoming cherry trees. Inside, he finds exactly what he hoped for: life-replenishing pills glowing with an otherworldly light. Among them are a few rare white pills, the most potent and valuable of all. Apologizing silently to the memory of his former master Jamon, he thinks, "At least I'm leaving the most expensive ones." Without hesitation, he pops a pill into his mouth, feeling its warmth dissolve and spread through his body. Energy rushes through him in waves, forcing him to focus and contain it. Gradually, he condenses the flowing energy into a single grain within his core. However, he carefully purifies it, rejecting any impurities, determined to create a foundation of pure energy. The effect is immediate and powerful. His energy core begins to glow, lighting up the cave with a blue hue. The pearls fall from their containers, and his cultivation reaches new heights. His eyes shift to an ethereal blue as he feels himself transcending to a higher state. He screams as his body trembles, struggling to contain the overwhelming force. His broken bones and injuries begin to heal. The power of the pill is far beyond what he anticipated, magnified by his young, malleable body. But something unexpected happens. His heart races, faster and faster, as the energy flows like violent waves, threatening to tear him apart from within. He realizes that if this excess energy reaches the core at the top of his head, he could lose everything. Struggling against the tide, he recalls an old conversation with Jamon, who had once asked him, "Are you a devotee or a martial artist?" Jamon had explained that martial artists seek control, while devotees let things flow naturally, respecting the way of the universe. If you try to block a river, it will inevitably find a new path. Jamon had often reminded him that humanity, like all living things, has its place in the natural order of the world. With his hand on his chest, Chang Mayang considers these words. Entering his sea of consciousness, he sees a towering wall within him, cracked and fractured. He senses an intense vibration beyond it, as if a dam is about to break. Jamon's words echo in his mind. "You can't stop the river, only let it flow." He decides to release, allowing the energy to flow. The energy flows effortlessly, rising to the center of his mind, and with it he feels his body transforming, growing stronger, more resilient. As dawn breaks outside, he awakes, lying on the cave floor like a fool, yet with a newfound clarity. Memories of flying came to him, and as he looked down at his hand, he realized what had happened. Somehow he'd survived the intense energy flow that had opened every pathway in his body. The risk had been immense, but the reward even greater. Not only had his innate energy been restored, but his potential had grown beyond what he had previously imagined. As he stepped out of the cave, Chang Mayang couldn't help but think of Brother Jamon and the teachings he once considered pointless. They now held profound meaning. In his past life, he'd been merely a swordsman, focused solely on combat, not understanding Manhwa's dual identity as both a martial arts academy and an aesthetic, almost spiritual sect. He chuckled at himself, scratching his head. Could he truly revive both the martial and philosophical spirit of Manhwa? He didn't know, but he resolved to give it his all. Glancing back at the chest, he decided to leave the pills behind. While he no longer needed them, the rest of the sect would benefit greatly. But before leaving, he grabbed an old bottle of liquor he'd once hidden away. Leaping through the mountains on his way back, he paused to admire the sunset, feeling lighter and stronger than ever. He noticed the fresh mountain air smelled off. Thanks to the cleansing effects of the pill, his body now reeked like a walking chemical weapon. Meanwhile, back at the sect, the disciples were shivering in the early morning cold, trudging reluctantly out for training. They muttered amongst themselves about Chang Mayang's recent strange behavior. One of them pointed out how worn out he looked, suggesting he might have suffered an energy surge. This speculation led the others to nod in agreement, believing maybe he'd exhausted himself and was avoiding training because he couldn't keep up. With renewed confidence, one bolder disciple questioned why they'd been following his orders in the first place. Sure, he'd been able to beat them all before, but now, if they teamed up, they could finally overpower him. Joe Gill, observing from the side, simply shook his head. Yanzhong whispered to him, "Let them go on. They'll learn soon enough." Just then, the gate creaked open and everyone froze, shivers running down their spines. Chang Mayang strode in, his entire form glowing with renewed energy. The disciples gaped, unable to believe the transformation. The boy who'd looked exhausted and sick was now standing before them, skin practically shining. Chang Mayang smiled, saying he understood why they might be frustrated. He admitted that he'd been neglecting training due to some recent health issues and sincerely apologized. But before they could make excuses, he assured them he'd make up for the lost time with even more rigorous training. Turning, he pointed toward the mountain. "Let's race to the Lotus Flower Peak," he announced, eyes gleaming with mischief. "And whoever comes in last will have to run twice." The disciples were dumbfounded. One was about to protest the grueling climb, but before he could say anything, Yanzhong had already started running, quickly followed by Joe Gill, who urged him to wait up. The rest stood there for a moment, watching their peers. Realizing they could be last and miss dinner, they all break into a full sprint. Watching them scramble, Chang Mayang chuckles, noting their boldness in contemplating a mutiny. But he appreciates it, recognizing that this mindset, the willingness to challenge the status quo, is essential. Disciples who only follow orders without ambition will eventually hit a wall. For him, martial arts is about earning the right to be heard through relentless training and skill. In his mind, the strength of Manhwa will only grow when each disciple grows, surpassing the greatness of the past. He yells after them, adding a final incentive: "The last one today won't get any dinner." The sun finally peeks over the mountains, casting light on a scene of weary disciples sprawled on the ground, panting. Joe Gill, also exhausted, notices Yanzhong struggling to his feet. Joe Gill realizes that this is why Yanzhong is the senior brother. It's not about skill or strength, but sheer willpower. Just then, a shadow falls over the group, and they look up to see Chang Mayang holding an armful of training weights. He smirks, announcing, "Anyone who's finished? Hand me the weights. I want to get some training in, too." The disciples stare at him in shock, wondering how he still has the energy. Joe Gill shakes his head, thinking, he's a monster. After a few rounds with the weights, Chang Mayang finally sets them down, announcing, "That's it for today. But remember, if anyone skips training tomorrow, you'll be training 10 times harder to make up for it." As he turns to leave, he casually tells them to clean up and put the equipment away, leaving the disciples grumbling and thinking of him as a complete tyrant. Later, at breakfast, Yanzhong notices the other disciples barely picking at their food. One disciple mutters that he's afraid to eat because he might just throw it all up. They exchange tired glances and turn to Yanzhong, calling him Big Brother, and asking if this intense training regimen isn't going too far. Joe Gill stays silent for a moment, then agrees that the training is undeniably brutal, pushing each of them to the edge. He says, "It's not like we're iron that gets stronger from being struck. Still, I think that bastard Chang Mayang knows this too. For now, let's just endure it. If nothing changes, we'll talk to him." The group smiles, comforted by his words, and Yanzhong promises that if things reach a breaking point, he'll confront Chang Mayang himself. That night, Joe Gill drags himself to bed, feeling every muscle in his body ache as he collapses onto his mattress. He doubts whether he'll be able to keep up with this pace, no matter how resilient he is. Just as he's drifting off, he hears a voice calling, "Senior brother." Jolted awake, he sees Chang Mayang standing by his bedside. In Mayang's hand, a faint red light glows. It's a plum blossom pill. Joe Gill stares, wide-eyed, as Chang Mayang tells him to keep quiet about it. Joe Gill, overwhelmed with gratitude, asks where he found it, but Mayang just says it will be useful to him and instructs him to take it immediately. He'll even help guide Joe Gill's key as he takes it. Moved beyond words, Joe Gill promises himself that he'll never think of Chang Mayang as a heartless monster again. Yet as Joe Gill closes his eyes, Chang Mayang grins wickedly. The real training is only just beginning, he thinks, anticipating the challenge ahead. The next morning, as the disciples trained, a vibrant energy filled the air. Each disciple's movements seemed sharper and more powerful, their attacks precise and controlled. Anun, watching from the side, noticed the difference immediately. Though they were practicing the same techniques, there was a newfound speed and strength in every strike. Their stances were more solid, their upper bodies steadier and infused with newfound strength. He marveled at how much they'd improved seemingly overnight, recalling Chang Mayang's promise to show results in a month. It didn't make sense. How could one morning of training bring about such drastic improvement? Anun observed their intense focus and passion and commented with pride, "Everyone's full of energy today. If you keep this up, I'll reward you by teaching you the great sword pacification technique." The disciples erupted in excitement, knowing this technique was highly advanced and rarely taught, a true testament to their progress. Anun smiled, pleased to see their motivation so high. Just then, Zhang appeared, calling Anun aside. A little later, beyond the training ground's walls, Zhang presented Anun with the original 6 Elements sword technique book that Chang Mayang had discovered. He urged Anun to read the last page. As Anun scanned the message, his eyes widened with shock. The message was directed to future successors, advising them that while adapting and advancing Manhwa's martial arts was a part of growth, the 6 Elements technique itself should never be altered. This foundation, it warned, was the very soul of Manhwa, and altering it would mean altering the spirit of the sect itself. Anun knew the 6 Elements had kept Manhwa's essence alive for generations. It was the starting point for every martial artist in the sect, the core of their training. He asked Zhang if they truly intended to return to teaching it. The 6 Elements technique, while vital, was complex and time-consuming, requiring immense dedication and patience. The newer technique had been developed as a streamlined version, one that offered faster results but diverged in essence from the original. Zhang nodded, expressing his own uncertainty. Though there was a desire within the sect to restore the traditional technique, he was torn. The message in the book was powerful, but so was the need for practical adaptations. Reflecting on these options, Anun commented, "The 6 Elements was replaced because we were racing against time. We didn't know how much longer Manhwa would stand, so we created something faster to build the next generation. There was no point in a foundation if there was no future." He then looked Zhang in the eyes and asked the real question, "Do you see a future for Manhwa now?" Zhang paused, contemplating the sect's current state. Though they'd seen improvement, countless challenges remained. It wasn't an easy question, and after a moment, he admitted as much. "That's why I don't have a clear answer," he said softly. Anun, listening closely, finally spoke up. "Then I'm against restoring the original 6 Elements. The technique we created may have its roots in the old form, but it's fundamentally different. The 6 Elements was designed to gradually overwhelm, to flow steadily like a river wearing down rock. But the new technique, it's fast, agile, and fluid. The disciples quickly adapted to the principles of the newer technique, and it was clear to the instructors that attempting to reintroduce the 6 Elements now could risk them mastering neither style fully. The 6 Elements, with its emphasis on balance, focus, and precise stance, required a level of foundational training and stability that, to Unram, seemed too late for them to achieve. Yet, as he watched the disciples, a realization struck him. Their stances, steady, grounded, and controlled, showed they did, in fact, possess the necessary stability. He remarked that their leg strength and stance control had developed impressively, even though he hadn't specifically trained them in this manner. He glanced over to see Chang Mayang casually scratching his nose, piecing together that this new strength might very well be the young disciple's doing. Curious, Unram sought permission to gather Chang Mayang's perspective. Calling him over, he asked a simple yet pivotal question. Which is better, to reach the highest point slowly or to arrive at a destination quickly? What path should Manhwa choose? Chang Mayang, without hesitation, pointed skyward and declared that aiming for the highest point was the only true path for Manhwa. His reason was simple yet profound. This is Manhwa. The leader, along with Unram, felt the weight of these words. To restore Manhwa's glory, there could be no compromise with its future. In any other sect, taking shortcuts might make sense, but for Manhwa, known for its unyielding principles and revered legacy, there was only one way forward. The leader and Unram exchanged glances, each moved by the conviction in Chang Mayang's words. They allowed him to return to his position, then spoke among themselves, marveling at how a child could speak with such pride and clarity about their own sect's legacy. Unram remarked that this clarity and purity of ideals could only come from one untainted by reality. The leader, resolute in his choice, then made his decision. He announced that, from this day forward, they would abandon the altered techniques and restore the 6 elements as the fundamental style of Manhwa. Not only that, but they would also incorporate every traditional technique left by their ancestors, honoring Manhwa's legacy and strength. Though Unram knew it would be a difficult path, he felt compelled by the leader's vision, which aimed not merely to revive Manhwa, but to ensure that when these disciples became the sect's future leaders, Manhwa would stand again among the greatest sects of the land. Meanwhile, as Chang Mayang returned to his spot, he muttered to himself, "Pathetic," he thought. "I'm practically handing them their principles, and they're still fumbling with the basics." Annoyed by their struggles, he decided it was time for him to visit the prefecture, convinced they were likely creating just as much chaos there. Chang Mayang looked around, exasperated by the disorder surrounding him, despite all the hard work that had brought peace and financial stability back to Manhwa. The old martial techniques were reestablished, and the disciples were filled with laughter. Yet, here in the city, chaos reigned. Sitting on a crate, Chang Mayang turned to Joe Gill, asking him pointedly if he was really the son of a merchant family. Joe Gill confirmed it, though his expression became confused when Mayang pressed him about what it was like to run a business on the continent. Chang Mayang sighed, realizing Joe Gill's experience probably wasn't enough to handle the mess left behind by the previous owners, especially since even the bandits had treated their workers better than the current management. With half the staff quitting to follow those previous bosses, the businesses were now short-staffed. Mayang observed the disciples fumbling, bringing in the wrong goods, arguing with suppliers, and wasting money on poor choices. Joe Gill explained that managing a business was complex. You had to know the exact quality of each item and understand your market, balancing quality with affordability to ensure profit. And even hiring help was difficult, as it often ended up draining funds instead of boosting profits. Mayang suggested that perhaps the Manhwa disciples could start learning the ropes of business management. Joe Gill gave him a dubious look and pointed out that this would be like asking a martial arts expert to teach to middle-aged men with no talent for it. And beyond just managing the place, Joe Gill added, the sect was missing the essential connections needed to get materials. Sending untrained people out to buy supplies usually resulted in them being tricked out of their money, returning empty-handed and embarrassed. Mayang's mind drifted back to his memories of Jangan. Now he could see just how crucial Jangan's role had been. Back then, everything ran smoothly under his watch, without Mayang needing to worry about finances or trade. But now, the situation had soured, and without someone like Jangan to manage the details, Mayang was ready to pull his hair out. He asked Joe Gill what the solution could be, and Joe Gill admitted he had no idea. If I knew, I'd be running my own shop by now, he shrugged. Even his father, who had decades of experience, couldn't have handled the situation on this scale. He mused that it would have been nice if Elder Hang were still active. Who's Elder Hang? Mayang asked, puzzled. Joe Gill explained that Elder Hang was a renowned merchant, a powerful magnate who used to trade across the entire Shanxi state. In the past, Hang had been a major sponsor of Manhwa, preventing the sect's collapse through generous financial support. What would a merchant see in sponsoring a martial sect without any decent martial artists? Mayang asked, raising an eyebrow. Joe Gill hesitated, brushing off the question, saying only that Hang supported multiple sects. If he were still healthy, he'd surely provide them with the guidance they needed now. Mayang jumped up, thrilled by the idea, and announced they should just go ask Hang for his advice. But Joe Gill gave him a sobering look, reminding him that Elder Hang had been in a coma for over a year, bedridden and unable to help. Chang Mayang sank back onto his crate, realizing that the situation was far more challenging than he'd hoped. He was startled by a familiar voice calling for him. It was Unam. Mayang turned as Unam approached, announcing that there was an urgent task and Mayang would have to return to Manhwa to complete it. Mayang protested, reminding Unam how grueling the climb was, arguing that there were surely stronger, better prepared disciples for the job. But Unam brushed off his excuses, pointing out that Mayang had the least on his plate compared to everyone else. Though Mayang tried to protest, claiming he had just finished sweeping the entire courtyard with a broken broom, no less, Unam cut him off, explaining that this task was critical. He had to deliver a letter to the finance office from the Uni Exchange Company, an organization under Master Hang. Joe Gill, overhearing the conversation, warned Mayang of the importance of the letter, mentioning that Master Hang's influence and wealth were unmatched. Mayang took the letter, assured them he would deliver it as quickly as possible, and set off into the mountains. As he climbed, curiosity gnawed at him, and he glanced at the letter. It was marked with a distinctive seal from Master Hang's company, and he recognized its significance immediately. Though he knew it was wrong, the temptation was overwhelming, and he whispered an apology to Zhanggan as he carefully broke the seal and opened the letter. The letter was a desperate plea, straight to the point, with no attempt to soften its urgency. It was sent by the vice president of Uni Exchange, explaining the dire condition of Master Hang, who had been in a coma for over a year. His symptoms were strange: a rapid, irregular heartbeat, a red tinge to his skin, complete immobility, and, most alarmingly, a bright red mark between his eyebrows. Every doctor had been consulted, but none could diagnose the cause, and it was only out of desperation that this letter was sent, hoping the sect leader might recognize these mysterious signs. The letter promised a significant reward for any assistance that could save Master Hang. As Mayang read the details, he was taken aback, recognizing the symptoms immediately. This was no ordinary ailment, but an affliction known as the demon flower, a rare, deadly condition inflicted by techniques from the demonic cult clan. His teeth clenched as memories of that cult surfaced, fanatics he thought he had eradicated during the battle on the 100-foot mountain. The realization was chilling. Not only had they survived, but they were once again active, likely with dark intentions for the world. His anger surged as he wondered why this clan repeatedly targeted Manhwa and its people, though the country was vast. They seemed to find every opportunity to oppose him and his sect. If he wanted to confirm the demon flower diagnosis, he'd need to see Master Hang in person. With his resolve solidified and the promise of a substantial reward only adding fuel to his determination, Chang Mayang raced through the forest, focused entirely on his goal. His determination was unbreakable. Nothing and no one would stand between him and the reward he believed he deserved. Whether it was for the money or, as he told himself, for the good of the sect, he was committed to helping Master Hang. Meanwhile, back at Manhwa, Yanzhong and the others had returned to the sect, weary from their training. Suddenly, Zhou Jel ran up, looking visibly agitated. Yanzhong raised an eyebrow, slightly exasperated, wondering what had made Zhou Gel look even crazier than usual. But Zhou Jel quickly explained it was an emergency. Chang Mayang had done something again. Without another word, Zhou Gel led Yanzhong to Chang Mayang's room, only to find it empty. Yanzhong, already suspicious, demanded to know where Chang Mayang had gone this time. Zhou Jel pointed to a note left on the bed. The note explained that Mayang was gone on business for several days and instructed them to cover for him however they could. It warned that if they missed any training, they would face his wrath upon his return. Yanzhong cursed him, calling him a troublemaker. while Jogel fretted, wondering what they should do. Yanzhong instructed him to keep everything quiet and tell the others to stay under the radar. He reasoned that since few kept a close eye on third-year disciples, they might just get away with it. Still, Yanzhong couldn't help but worry about what had driven Mayang to leave for days. It could only mean trouble. Out in the wilderness, Chang Mayang continued sprinting tirelessly from tree to tree, never pausing. Exhaustion finally began to creep in. He had already run an incredible 117 kilometers, and it was only now that he started to feel the strain. In his previous life, feats like crossing mountains had been simple, but it had been a long time since he'd pushed himself this hard. His destination lay in the city of Xi'an, a place he had many memories of from his past, where he'd often been in high spirits and held the respect of many. An old memory bubbled up. Arriving in the bustling city, Mayang slipped into a familiar drinking spot. He had been second in command back then, and no one dared question him. As he enjoyed a drink, a bit drunk, he accidentally bumped into a man next to him, causing his drink to spill. Annoyed, the stranger turned and insulted him, telling Mayang to apologize. But when the man recognized him as a Manhwa disciple, his tone turned mocking, accusing him of being rotten. Mayang's expression darkened. The stranger laughed, taunting that he'd seen plenty of Manhwa disciples, but they always ended up defeated. He scoffed that it was foolish for Mayang to come all the way from Manhwa just to stir trouble in Xi'an. At that moment, Mayang's drunken haze cleared. With a fluid motion, he delivered an upward heel kick, sending the bottle flying. Before the man could react, Mayang had already struck him and his two companions with precise taps to the neck, leaving them floored. The two sects had always competed fiercely, both excelling in swordsmanship and constantly challenging each other's strength. Though many Manhwa disciples avoided Xi'an to avoid these encounters, Mayang thrived on the thrill of stepping into enemy territory. Here, away from the watchful eyes of the elders, he could drink, laugh, and assert his strength freely. Chang Mayang recalls that he never started the fights with the Southern Edge disciples. Every clash occurred because they provoked him. Yet, despite countless defeats, these rivals always returned for more. Their tenacity must be part of what helped the Southern Edge sect become so formidable. Still, he's aware that if he encounters them again, there could be trouble. Confident as ever, though, he reasons that most people around here won't even recognize him, so he should be fine. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to a doctor examining the pulse of a gravely ill man, Jiang Wei's father. The doctor releases the man's hand and gravely informs Jiang Wei that there's nothing they can do. Heartbroken, Jiang Wei questions if this truly is his father's fate. A member of the Tang family, known for expertise with poisons, confesses that even with their knowledge, they can't identify what's causing this illness. The son desperately asks if the cause, but when he notices the doctor's hesitation, he apologizes for his outburst. After the doctors leave, Jiang Wei sits alone, wondering what options remain. His father's health is deteriorating day by day, and despite all the resources they have, nothing seems to help. His father had always been kind and charitable, yet he now faces an agonizing end due to a mysterious ailment. Suddenly, an elder from the Southern Edge sect named Mok Song-ji arrives. He expresses his regret but insists that it's time for Jiang Wei to accept reality. He suggests performing a ritual known as the Taoist rite to save the father's life. Jiang Wei, though polite, doesn't want to resort to this method just yet. Mok Song-ji tries to convince him, suggesting it's a rare privilege to have a Southern Edge elder perform such a ritual. Jiang Wei holds his ground, explaining he wants to await responses from other sects he's contacted for help before deciding. The elder is visibly displeased, claiming that Jiang Wei's efforts are pointless. Jiang Wei is deeply frustrated with the elder's attitude, but he has to tolerate it, given the Southern Edge sect's influence. Known as one of the 10 major sects, the Southern Edge's reputation has been steadily growing. In fact, some say they could become the strongest sword sect within a few generations. Thus, as vice president of a trading company, Jiang Wei can't afford to openly oppose an elder from such a prominent sect. He's also certain that if the Southern Edge truly had a cure, they would offer it freely to earn goodwill before discussing money. This reluctance to act without payment suggests they have ulterior motives. Mok Song-ji, unfazed, claims that if even the best doctors have failed, the ritual is the only solution. Just then, an attendant arrives to inform Jiang Wei that a messenger from Manhwa has come. Jiang Wei is surprised, as Manhwa was the last place he contacted and he hadn't expected them to respond so quickly. Mok Song-ji, however, scoffs, questioning why a representative from Manhwa, now considered a declining sect, would be worth seeing. He warns Jiang Wei to be wary of any tricks they might attempt, doubting that such a struggling sect could offer a real solution to his father's illness. Jiang Wei is in the corridors when a servant informs him that the visitor from Manhwa is still waiting at the gate. Annoyed, Jiang Wei reprimands the servant for being discourteous and insists on meeting the guest immediately. At the gate, Jiang Wei opens it and apologizes to the young man for the wait, introducing himself as the vice president of the trading company. The young man waves off the apology, stating he isn't there for courtesies. Jiang Wei notices the visitor's casual demeanor. The young man, who appears relaxed and unbothered, cleans his ear with his pinky and blows on it. This surprises Jiang Wei, who then inquires about the rest of the delegation. The young man calmly states that he came alone, which makes Jiang Wei break into a cold sweat. The young man confidently adds that he has a cure for the old man's illness and demands to be taken inside immediately. He also mentions wanting to discuss the huge reward mentioned in the letter. The vice president is baffled by the young man's audacity. The courtyard falls silent as everyone stares at the visitor, who seems entirely unperturbed. When asked again if he truly came alone, the young man confirms it. This leaves Jiang Wei and his servant unsure of what to make of the situation. Mok Song-ji, the elder from the Southern Edge sect, begins laughing mockingly. He ridicules Manhwa, saying it's absurd for them to send such a young and inexperienced individual. He criticizes the sect's leader, expecting wisdom, but seeing this as a cheap trick. The young man, unfazed, introduces himself as Sha Mayang, a third-class disciple of Manhwa. He explains that his sect received the vice president's letter and sent him because he believes he knows the cause of the illness. This statement startles Jiang Wei, who has invited countless physicians and martial artists, none of whom dared to speak with such confidence. For a moment, he wonders if the young man might genuinely have the answer. However, Mok Song-ji interrupts, dismissing the boy as a fraud due to his youth. He insists the vice president stop entertaining this nonsense and return inside. But Sha Mayang steps forward, placing a hand on his back, and asks Mok Song-ji who he thinks he's addressing so arrogantly. A breeze ripples through their clothes as everyone feels the tension rise. Mok Song-ji, taken aback, demands to know what insolence this is and points out his Southern Edge sect uniform. Sha Mayang calmly retorts that this makes even less sense. He sarcastically states that with all of Mok Song-ji's arrogance, he assumed the elder must be a doctor or someone with an actual solution. Mok Song-ji, momentarily silent, eventually claims that Master Hang fell ill because he strayed from the virtuous path. He insists that the only cure is a Taoist ritual to calm the wrath of the heavens. Sha Mayang sharply rebukes the claim about the Taoist ritual, stating that such practices are not the expertise of the Southern Edge sect. He argues that if a ritual were needed, it would be better to consult the Wading sect or the Cumin sect. Turning to Jiang Wei, he questions whether the vice president doesn't agree that his father deserves treatment by an actual expert. Jiang Wei is momentarily speechless, struck by the boy's unexpected knowledge. Mok Song-ji, furious, steps forward and angrily demands how Sha Mayang dares speak so disrespectfully to an elder of a sect. However, the boy remains utterly unfazed, showing no regard for the elder's authority. Mok Song-ji, seething with rage, implores Jiang Wei to expel the boy immediately, but Jiang Wei doesn't respond. Instead, Jiang Wei calmly reminds Mok Song-ji that the Southern Edge sect is only a guest of the UN Trading Company. And here he decides how guests are treated. Addressing Sha Mayang as young master, Jiang Wei politely asks if the boy would answer some questions. Sha Mayang nods, and Jiang Wei inquires about the symptoms the boy claims to recognize. Sha Mayang explains that Master Hang likely passed through the Mountain of My Feet during one of his business trips where he may have been contaminated. This claim startles Jiang Wei as his father has not traveled there. Confused, Sha Mayang asks if Jiang Wei is sure and whether his father had encountered bandits recently. Jiang Wei confirms that no such incident occurred in the past 5 years. The boy, puzzled, asks where exactly the old man could have been injured, but Jiang Wei remains silent, his hope dwindling. Mok Songji seizes the moment to mock Manhwa, declaring it a waste of time, and accusing them of being mere bandits trying to exploit the trading company. He suggests Sha Mayang's visit is nothing but a scam. Jiang Wei, clearly disheartened, urges the boy to reconsider his position, acknowledging his belief in being able to help but emphasizing that any mistake could worsen the old man's condition. Apologetically, Jiang Wei prepares to ask Sha Mayang to leave, promising to send thanks to Manhwa for their effort. As the door begins to close, Sha Mayang boldly holds it open, declaring that Master Hang's skin must have turned red and his body icy cold. He describes other symptoms. If someone runs a finger over the old man's palm, the skin color changes, and before slipping into a coma, Master Hang would have experienced severe chills and developed black marks on his neck and between his eyebrows. Jiang Wei is shocked, realizing the boy's words perfectly match his father's condition. He quickly pulls the door open and demands how the boy knows this. Sha Mayang smiles confidently, asking if he may continue. Apologizing profusely, Jiang Wei invites him inside, while Mok Songji protests. Jiang Wei turns to Mok Songji and pointedly asks if he knows anything about the illness, as it's clear he has no solution. Jiang Wei dismisses Mok Songji, stating that the Southern Edge sect's involvement is no longer welcome, and warns that if they interfere further, he will send a letter to the sect's officials. Frustrated and defeated, Mok Songji leaves in silence. Inside, Sha Mayang inspects Master Hang, who is in a terrible state, his skin bright red and his condition far worse than the boy had anticipated. Sha Mayang senses the illness has progressed significantly, noting it would be a miracle if the old man could survive another year. He places his hand on the old man's wrist and uses his internal energy to examine him, discovering traces of someone's poorly applied treatment, likely done by an amateur. Jiang Wei anxiously asks if there's any way to save his father. Sha Mayang, with his usual calm confidence, assures him that curing the old man wouldn't be difficult. Initially, Jiang Wei misunderstands, thinking the boy is saying the opposite, but Sha Mayang repeats himself to clarify. For now, he delays the symptoms, stabilizing the old man's condition and ensuring he is no longer in immediate danger. This small victory gives Jiang Wei a glimmer of hope amidst his despair. If you love the story, don't miss out on the previous videos. They're packed with excitement. And hey, if you're new here, make sure to hit that like button and smash that subscribe button to be part of the adventure. We'll catch you in the next part. Till then, stay amazing and see ya.